Minnesota were a surprise last season. They were awesome, but they didn't get as far as they wanted to. And now they're back to do it again. Michael Bolton, are you from Minnesota?
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I'm also known as Juicy Lucy. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and get $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. So double bang and hit the thumb and leave your comments as we talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves. That's what we're getting into right now, so let's do it. So joining me once again to talk about this Minnesota Timberwolves team is Ben Beacon, the host of the Locked On Wolves podcast. Ben, have you ever had a Juicy Lucy?
I have actually, yeah. It's fantastic.
Are they good? They're good. I've seen documentaries on it. Like I watch random videos on what's the best regional hamburgers, and that always comes up. So yeah, it does look good. Is there anything we need to be careful of when we're getting a Juicy Lucy?
Well, extremely hot in the middle, first of all, but there's also multiple places you can get them. I think Matt's Bar. This is maybe I shouldn't be taking a stand on this, but I think Matt's Bar at least claims to be the original. And I think they're the ones that spell it without the I in the word juicy. So like Juicy and Lucy are spelled the same way. That's the one that that's actually the only one that I've had. So that's the one that I would advocate for.
All right, Matt's Bar, Juicy Lucy, no I. We've got that sorted. That's the most important part of this show. But the other part we're going to talk about is, of course, the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I believe when we were on this show 2 years ago talking about the Wolves, just after they'd made the Gobert deal, we were like, hey, they could be a really good regular season team, and let's not really sure what happens offensively heading into the playoffs and how that could all work. And then, of course, the first year was a disaster. And then basically that exact script sort of played out last season. Is they had offensive, they weren't terrible in the playoffs, like they were pretty good, but the offense did start to become somewhat of a problem in the playoffs, which is where that concern lies. And we're going to talk about the future of the front court and all that sort of stuff here. But is that something that the team recognized and focused on in terms of being able to figure out how they solve that offensive concern as we get into the pointy end of the season?
Yeah, and I think the most frustrating thing for Timberwolves fans is that when Chris Finch was hired 3.5 years ago now, which is an eternity ago, the middle of the 2021 season, the second COVID-shortened season, he was, billed as this offensive guru because he had been, internationally was running 3 center offenses in European basketball leagues a decade and a half ago, and was one of the coaches with the Nuggets. Jokic's rookie year was the offensive coordinator of the Pelicans when they had DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis. And the idea was like, okay, he can figure this out. And that was one of the reasons why I was very optimistic, and a lot of people were, about Rudy and Cat together offensively. And it's funny because, like, the defense, of course, the first year with Rudy, like you alluded to, was very good. It was top 10, but it actually wasn't that bad the year before. It was only slightly better the first year with Rudy, and the offense was worse. And so the team regressed by about 4 games in the regular season, and actually had a lower seed and wasn't as good in the playoffs. But then this year, the defense was by far the best in the entire league. And it was actually the biggest gap, or the second largest gap in the last 30 years in terms of the best defensive rating to the second best in the league. Just completely dominant. And the offense was very middle of the pack. Spent a lot of the year kind of low middle of the pack, like 19th, 20th, 21st in the league, offensive rating wise. And it finished, I think, 16th, or depending where you look, 15th to 17th. So yeah, it's certainly a concern because they expected it to be better. I think there's a lot of optimism, and we can get into this, that it'll improve because Anthony Edwards is just going to keep getting better. And that's, you're hanging your hat on him anyway. And then also another full year, really only the second full year we're going into, because Cat had the massive injury, missed 60 plus games 2 years ago. So you get another full year of Cat and Rudy together, another full year of Anthony Edwards improving. And then we'll get into the offensive moves, which there weren't many, but replacing Kyle Anderson with Joe Ingles, well, it will hurt them defensively. Depending on what Joe Ingles looks like in age 37 year, whatever this is, plus the rookies that we'll talk about, like the offense, they added guys who should help the offense. And if the defense takes, a quarter step back, it's still the best defense or one of the best 2 or 3 defenses in the league. So if the offense improves incrementally, like the idea is they'll be right where they were last year.
Yeah, like when I did my season recap for the Wolves, one of the things that really stood out was that the elite high-level teams usually have a top 10 offense and top 10 defense, and they were like 16th in offense. And I go like that. This is the clear focus. This is what needs to change. This is what needs to get better. And you're right. Like you can go from first in the NBA in defense to still first while being worse at defense and improving that offense. And that's what they've got to do. So they did make some moves to try and address that. They traded up, which I don't think many people saw coming in the draft, to select Rob Dillingham at pick number 8. They do bring in Joe Ingles. Terrence Shannon is picked in the first round. PJ Dozier gets resurrected for the 15th time. He just always just seems to, never does anything, but always just seems to just be, his name is appearing. He's there. Jesse Edwards comes in on a 2-way as well. But we're going to talk about the biggest addition again. They weren't making big moves on the free agent market, and we know part of the reasons why they were aggressive in the draft, because Tim Conley was like, we've got restrictions with our cap, and this is one of the ways you get a cost control player in, and that's why they did it. They traded in for Rob Dillingham. I saw Rob play live in Summer League. He is small, he is short, he is skinny. I won't say the numbers were awesome, but they weren't bad. Like, he averaged almost 8 assists a game in Summer League, which is pretty hard to do. He shot 31% on threes. He had only 24 usage. He had played 30 minutes a night. He is small, but he had active hands. And it is very hard for rookie point guards. It's very hard for rookie point guards on very good teams. It's very good for undersized, small, skinny rookie point guards to have any success. But like we've said, I think the expectation, or not even the reliability, but they hope that they get something, because that is the offensive engine that they brought in for that second unit to try and give them somewhat of a boost. And it's hard to do at this age, but he is going to be counted on.
Yeah, and it's funny because Naz Reid was the 6th man of the year, but obviously Naz Reid's not a point guard, right? So they need somebody that can also run that offense and can give you, for as good as Naz Reid is, and he's fantastic. He played a lot with the starters and also isn't somebody that you're really truly running your offense through. He scores a lot on catch and shoot threes in transition. As a role big, he's not handling the ball in the perimeter a ton, even though he can for a big. You need somebody that can attack from the perimeter and also not, can also at least be dangerous enough catch and shoot wise. And that's the idea behind Rob Dillingham. Is like last year, the Timberwolves, I was critical of them at this time last year for not bringing in a true point guard in free agency. And they just kind of said, all right, we'll do the Shake Milton thing. We'll do the Nickeil Alexander-Walker thing if we have to. And, Jordan McLaughlin's our break glass in case of emergency. And sure enough, Shake Milton wasn't good and got traded at the deadline in the deal that brought in Monte Morris, who never fully recovered from an early season injury in Detroit. And they still ended up with Jordan McLaughlin playing some playoff minutes, or late down the stretch regular season minutes, over Monte Morris. And then neither of those guys played in some of the playoff games when it got to the Mavs series. And it was just Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Ant, and Mike Conley running the offense. So this is a combination move of, hey, we need more punch off the bench besides Naz Reid. And looking down the road, Mike Conley has 1 year. Actually, he signed an extension. He's got 2 years left, but he can opt out after this year and potentially could retire. And even if he doesn't, we even saw in the playoffs last year, he started to get worn down. They need somebody who's the point guard of the future. And as you mentioned, cost control, they can't sign anybody in free agency. They don't have a ton of trade assets. They don't have any after this trade for Dillingham. They don't have any firsts they can trade. So that's the idea, is it helps us this year because we get a creator off the bench, both as a passer and creating for himself. He's also really good catch and shoot. He was 48% in college on catch and shoot threes, which is nuts. And hopefully it doesn't hurt you too much defensively, but that's the big question mark. As you said, he's very small. But all that to say, he's going to get a ton of opportunity off the bench. He's going to play right away. They've said as much. And it's clear looking at the roster, he's basically their 8th guy. He's going to play significant minutes. And, from day one, that's he's going to get the chance. He has to.
There's nobody else who's going to be in that role. Dacian Nix, that's not what they need. Right. He's there, so he has to. I guess we can talk about rookie point guards struggling, and they do, but it's a different responsibility here for Rob. It's not hey, you're the face of the franchise. You need to go out there and run the entire show, and you're playing 35 minutes. It's not come in, score, sit down after 10 minutes, come back and do it again for 10 minutes, and you're done. That's what he's got to do. So it is a different responsibility. It's a different role. It's a different sort of thing that high-level rookie point guards usually don't get put into that position. So that is going to be intriguing, but you're right. Like he has to play. They have put chips in. They couldn't really put them in many other spots, but they've done it. Here we go, and we'll see exactly what that leads to. We're going to talk about the guys that left the Timberwolves in a second, but first, today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Game Time is... It's the app. Well, first of all, number one, it is a authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball. So when you're looking for baseball tickets across the summer, Game Time is the place that you've got to go. They've got so many different great features as well. Zone deals, where you just choose an area of the field that you want to sit, and they pick the best price, saving you money. They've got all-in pricing, which is something that when you're using the app, you go in, it's in your settings, you click it, and it displays you all-in pricing, so you don't get hit with hidden fees at checkout. Another great feature. The flash deals, so when something is happening in your area right now, and the closer it gets to the event happening, the price actually goes down with Game Time. All these things make this the best experience that you can have when getting tickets to events. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets and buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last bit of tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's talk about the guys that did leave off this squad. Ben, you mentioned it already. Kyle Anderson is gone. Monte Morris and Jordan McLaughlin. Monte Morris was just bad last season. I think he had back surgery, so that's a part of it. McLaughlin has always sort of flashed and never quite got there. They traded away Wendell Moore Jr., I guess, to clear some cap space. TJ Warren was somehow on this team last season, but he's not there. But realistically, when we talk about what is the thing that they need to pay attention to, or the loss they need to cover up, it is Kyle Anderson. Now, we can look at some of Anderson's numbers, and some of them look really bad, because they are, like, he just forgot, not that he was ever a great shooter, but he wasn't a 23% shooter, and that was really troubling. Like, he's never going to be a big scorer, but he moves the ball. He functions as a point guard in that second unit. So we can talk about having a point guard there. Yeah, they lost their three point guards in McLaughlin, in Morris, and in Anderson. Now, Joe Ingles does a lot of that. He's more of a shooter than a defender, and that's sort of that replacement there. But Anderson's defense and shooting his defense was great, his shooting was bad. The other thing with Kyle Anderson is that over the last 2 years, when Karl-Anthony Towns has gotten hurt, this is the man that steps in and starts. This is the guy that comes in, plays 28 minutes, gets 10, 5, and 5 with a steal, does it almost every game. You know everything that you're going to get from Kyle Anderson, and now you don't. So there is the chance, Naz Reid can step into a larger role, but I also think that means that, and correct me if I'm wrong, there might be a little bit of extra faith in maybe like Josh Minott or maybe Leonard Miller might have to be ready to step up with some additional size if they do need some. Like, Minott's a very good defender. Yeah, Miller's got that size to be solid defensively as well. Like, is there hope that those guys can maybe do something?
Yeah, there's a chance. I mean, you look at the top, like 7 of the top 8 rotation guys are back. Kyle Anderson is the only one that's not. Monte Morris was essentially the 9th guy. So you're talking about 7 of the top 8 are back. So you're really only filling that one rotation spot, and that's Rob Dillingham. And then your 9th spot, which in the regular season usually you're going to play 9 guys, that's probably Joe Ingles. It could be Terrence Shannon Jr., their second first-round pick this year, who was in the running for Player of the Year in men's basketball this year before legal issues. So those are your top 10 guys in some order. But the next man up, it's probably Josh Minott, and I do think we're going to see him and TJ Shannon kind of each of those guys is going to have a shot at that 10th man role. My take on it right now is it's going to depend on the matchup. It's going to depend, obviously, on training camp, preseason. But I think there's a real shot it's Josh Minott. I'd be surprised. Leonard Miller, it seems like the team thinks he's far too raw at this point. He was good in the G League last year, but it was also his second year in the G League since he played with the Ignite the year before. And he was actually really impressive, I thought, in Summer League.
Yeah,
but
too.
There's some... What's that?
Yeah, I was impressed with him as well.
Yeah, no, he was great. And I think the team has a little bit of like maybe some immaturity concerns with him is kind of what I've heard and some things like that. So we'll see. I'd love for him to get a shot, but I think it's more likely Josh Minott as a defender, as a rebounder. He's a fantastic rebounder. He doesn't give you anything offensively other than he's a pretty good cutter. And we saw him, they're trying to develop some of that in Summer League too out of Minott. But yeah, I think it's TJ Shannon. I think it's Josh Minott. Those are the guys that are going to fight for some of those end of the rotation minutes. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head with you're losing. Chris Finch always called Kyle Anderson his Swiss Army knife. Like an absolute favorite to a fault of Chris Finch. And he played too many lineups with Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert on the floor at the same time. That's probably my biggest criticism of what he did last year. You had two guys on the whole roster that couldn't shoot. Like, just don't play them together. So now you don't have that problem, but you're losing also a defensive Swiss Army knife, and that's where I think it hurts the most, because now you're down to Alexander Walker is really your only clear plus defender off the bench, which is exactly why Shannon and Minot may both get an opportunity, because both of those guys are likely plus defenders if they get the chance. So I think they're going to kind of battle it out for those fringe rotation minutes in the absence of Kyle Anderson, and I think the I guess offensive initiation minutes go to Dillingham and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who also did a little bit of that last year too.
Yeah, Alexander Walker had been more of that playmaker earlier in his career, then sort of did transition out to become more of a wing defender. But then when some injuries did hit, he had to change it up. And I thought he was pretty successful for most of that. This is a team where the starting lineup is not really in any question, I don't think, Ben. It's Conley, it's Edwards, it's McDaniels, it's Towns, it's Gobert. I just want to quickly focus on McDaniels here, because we all know he's a really good defender. He doesn't necessarily generate defensive events, which, he's not generating big steals. He's not getting big blocks. He probably is playing out of position still, because I think, most success, he'd probably be at the 4. He's had some trouble, I think, in terms of pushing through to bigger minutes, but also like doing something more offensively. I haven't really seen this growth in his offensive game, and he sort of just sits there and does what he does, which is useful, but I haven't seen a next level there. Do you think they need a new level from him, or do you think it's possible that he can actually do more, especially offensively?
I think it's certainly possible. I don't know that they need him to go to the next level offensively in order to. They went to the conference finals last year and obviously completely wore down and had really bad series against the Mavericks. I don't know that it's necessary, but if he does, then this team should get to the finals if he levels up again. I shouldn't say again, because you're right. I would say it's more consistency than anything else with McDaniels. The progression of his career as a rookie, it was awful offensively. He was pump fake, take one dribble and shoot a contested 2 almost every time, but he still shot 36% from 3. And it was like, hey man, just shoot more 3s and less contested 2s. And then the next year he was shooting the 3s, but he was missing them. He was under 32% from 3. And then he was also driving, but not getting all the way to the rim. And then 2 years ago in his third season, he was 40% from 3, seemed to kind of start to be putting things together. And then last year he regressed again, shooting the ball. And last year was when they really needed him, because Cat was healthy and they needed McDaniels to only catch and shoot 3s. And he was 34% from 3. So yeah, it's been the consistency is the bigger issue with him. They don't need him to do much other than be he really is the 5th option offensively right now, even with Conley and Gobert. It depends on the night, but a lot of times, they would force the ball to Gobert, sometimes too much. Conley would call his own number occasionally, but he was fantastic from outside the arc. I guess really McDaniels he functioned as the 4th option, but if he could add the elements of the decision making, either let it fly or get to the basket and not mess with anything in between. Last year he tried to add a little bit of a playmaking element that wasn't super successful. I don't know. I do think he can make. He's only 23. He turns 24. I think this fall. Yeah. He turns 24 in September. So, I absolutely think he can. He's got all the tools. He obviously can shoot, but again, it's consistency, and he's so good defensively on the ball and even off the ball too. I think if he were to take it to the next level, you're talking a fringe all-star player if he just becomes an adequate offensive player and finds some level of consistency. But he should be the 3rd option in this offense, right? With the role that Rudy plays and the age of Mike Conley, McDaniels should be the 3rd option. It's just the consistency has not been there.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be forced into him this season. You got to do more. It's what is happening is successful. It's working. There's going to have to be something that happens at some point down the line, but I'm not sure that's this year. In terms of your projected group coming off the bench, it's most of these guys we've already talked about. It's Dillingham, it's Alexander Walker, Ingles, and Naz Reid, who we're going to talk about a little bit later. And we mentioned guys like Shannon and Minot who might push into that group, but this, I think, is going to be the first bunch of guys who gets that opportunity. There's not a huge amount, I don't think, to talk about with those guys there, so we won't. We're going to get into some other stuff in a second, but first of all, today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Across the summer, there's not as many sports on. NBA's off, NHL's off, NFL's off, college football is off, college basketball is off, but things are starting to slowly get back. But FanDuel knows that there's just not as much stuff to pay attention to. So what they're going to do is all through the summer, every single customer, every single day gets one of two things: a boost or a bonus. Simple. It's not for the new customers. It's not for a special code. It's nothing. Just every customer will get a boost or a bonus every day on FanDuel. And you can use that to check out the Minnesota Twins and maybe their hopes for the playoffs. Or maybe you want to check out what's going to happen with the Vikings. And now that they have no quarterback, you maybe check the futures on that over at FanDuel. But you can check it all out. And with your daily boost or bonus, well, that's helping you get the most out of your summer. So go to FanDuel.com right now. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, Ben, we've talked starters, we've talked the bench. Now it's time for us to get in here and have a look at the player to watch. We've teased the discussion here on Naz Reid already. He is not only a favorite in Minnesota, he is a favorite for everybody. Honestly, the amount of positive stuff that I hear about Naz Reid and the way people talk about him is huge. Like, people talk about him all the time. So much so that sometimes I feel like I need to push back on it, where there's people go too far. They go, nah, we've got to play Naz Reid over Rudy Gobert. I go, bro, have you seen some of these numbers for Naz Reid in the playoffs? Because that has sort of skated under. I would say he was bordering on bad through a lot of the playoffs, but because he goes out there and has big scoring bursts, people get excited. And there'll be people go, man, just trade Cat because we've got Reid. And I go, okay. I think the role that he's in now is really useful, but I don't like to be the guy that's like, okay, calm down, like this guy, while he's super fun. Like, he's not doing the things that you think he's doing. And there is I think a misconception about how Reid performs. Look, you say that he's a player to watch this season. I think there is a chance he takes some of those Kyle Anderson minutes, but it's also worth remembering that every time that Towns was out, Chris Finch wouldn't go to Reid. Like, he would go to Kyle Anderson, and Reid would stay in that hybrid backup bench role. So what are we watching for? Is it to see whether he can do a little bit more? Can he improve that defense? Can he wipe away some of those poor performances from the playoffs?
I think it's partly the playoff thing because that's what everybody remembers from him. Now, I mean, like, he is a folk hero and he's on the cover of Slam magazine now. Like, it's kind of it's incredible, as you said. I think for him, it's just that this was really the first year where he saw consistent, like, he had a role that he knew it was the same all the time, and he went out and won Sixth Man of the Year. He turns 25 here in a couple of weeks. And he signed a 3-year extension before last year, and he has a player option after this year. So this is effectively a contract year for him. And so that's motivation, right? So I think he takes what he did last year. He may be even more aggressive offensively. He may be, looking for whatever comes next contract wise. And also the Timberwolves are going to have to take a hard look at trading him, in the offseason. If he were to opt in for some reason, if, God forbid he gets hurt or something and opts in, then they'd look at trading him. Or do they try and get in front of it? I'd obviously be shocked if they traded him during the season. That means something's gone horribly wrong. But it's just a weird situation for him, because now that deal he signed a year ago, I wouldn't say it looks like a bargain, but it looks like at the time, I thought it was a very impressive deal. I wasn't sure they'd bring him back because I thought, like, hey, who needs a third center for what he's going to get? But he took a little less money to stay with Minnesota. And so I think in what's effectively a contract year, everybody's motivated for him to have a good season. The Wolves are, and he's motivated for him to have a good season, and the opportunity is going to be there. As we already talked about, it's not like he's going to run the offense in place of Kyle Anderson, but the ball would potentially be in his hands more without Kyle Anderson. And I just think he's the reigning Sixth Man of the Year, and he's going to play to that. And there's still some upside there. I think for me, the biggest thing, and I pushed back a couple of years ago when people were when Cat was hurt, everybody was like, well, Naz is just as good and all this stuff. He's not a good enough rebounder for his size and for the role he plays. He took a step back. This year is actually his worst rebound rate of his career. He's got to rebound a little bit better. He's got to make some better decisions with the ball in his hands. I think the 3-point rate got a little out of control at times. Like, he did shoot 41% from 3 this year, but he was like 34% for his career heading into this season. Yeah. And so for him to take like half of his shots from 3 was a little bit aggressive. So, the shot selection sometimes and the rebounding could improve a little. We're nitpicking. He's obviously a great player. I just think there could still be another level for Naz overall. And because of the contract thing, anything could really happen this year for him.
I think he's one of these guys that the people in the fantasy space really love, and they do always sort of clamor for more Naz Reid. But like his playoffs, they were bad. Like his EPM was a negative 2.8, like from a negative 0.1 during the regular season. His 3-point shooting went from 41 to 36%. He hit 30% on mid ranges. Like he just really sort of struggled in many areas during the playoffs. And I look at what he did, like as a backup center with 23 usage during the season in 24 minutes, averaging 13 points. I don't know what more there is, like what more that he does in his game. Like I find it really hard, Ben, to look at this and go, well, I expect that Naz is going to shoot better than 41% from three. Like I can't expect that. Yet does he get more than 23 usage? Like that's also a little bit hard, especially bringing Rob Dillingham into that bench group. Like he's going to take shots. Like find it hard to see that he goes into a huge usage role. It's just going to have to be getting more minutes. And I worry that there's a little bit of that. Like he does what he does in that great role, but like a Montrezl Harrell, when you put him into a larger role as a full-time starter, and it's like he gets exposed really quickly, and then it's like that's the worry I think there with Naz. So I think people need to be very cautious of, sometimes they'll be like, why aren't they giving him minutes? Because he scored really well, but like then there was a bunch of other stuff that didn't happen that needs to be sort of tidied up before we can fully rely upon him to get those minutes.
Yeah, and I always like going back to his first couple seasons in the league. That was always my, those first glimpses of him. And he's, gotten into great shape. He was overweight. That's why he went undrafted. And he had a couple of he showed flashes, right? His rookie year, his second year, and people wanted to see more. And that was exactly what you said. As I was like, this is one of those where like, if you give him more, what's going to happen here? Like some guys are perfect for the role they're in. And then he got into great shape, and he was so bad defensively. He was horrible at defending the pick and roll, and that improved rapidly. Part of it was mobility, but he didn't understand, they played a variety of defenses early in his career, and he clearly didn't, like the game was too fast for him at that point in time. But now he gets it. Like he's figured out that side of it. He's gotten into shape. He has a role. So I think it's part of it is just, and this is also part of the folk heroism, I think, with him, is like every time there's been a challenge, he's met it, and he's continued to like, level up. And I agree with what you're saying about his opportunity. Like, how could he possibly get more? I don't know. I mean, I also struggle to find anybody else that I'd really consider a breakout candidate. I think with Naz, he just keeps getting a little bit better. So maybe it keeps happening incrementally, and it's more of that than a breakout. But I definitely take your point, because it's not like he's not going to take a starting role from Cat or from Rudy. And as you said, when, I guess in this, given the way the roster is built now, maybe he does start if somebody gets hurt. I guess that's always a possibility with no Kyle Anderson. But yeah, I just think he's in for another really, really strong year.
That does bring us to talk about the make or break player. And I think this does even tie into Reid, because when I ask all the hosts to do this, they give me their answers because they're all great guys. And your answer was Karl-Anthony Towns. And I think this leads into that situation, because you're right. Like if Towns is hurt or Gobert is hurt, then Reid probably would need to start as a full-time thing. But like how does a Reid Towns front court work together? Like how does that defensive pairing look? Like there's real questions there. And look, we hear it all the time. Like nearly any time I talk about any team, there's always like, what do you think the starting group's going to be? It's like, we're going to trade for Towns and he's going to start. Like this has been happening. Like, this is a guy that was considered the face of the franchise 2-3 years ago. Things have changed considerably, obviously, but is that noise real? Are they like wanting to get out of the Towns business? Because again, this time last year it was like, we got to get rid of Gobert. Like he can't be here. They can't work together. Gobert's gone now. It's like, see you later, Towns. Like what's real about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's traded it. Certainly not anymore this offseason. I think there'd have to be they'd have to be awful, 500 or worse at the All-Star break in order to trade him at the deadline. I think next summer it's a real conversation, and it's all driven by the cap that we already talked a little bit about. They're going to be in the luxury tax, and you look a couple of years, the Supermax is going to kick in, and then you talk about repeater tax, which you just can't do in the market the Timberwolves are in. Really, nobody wants to do that anyway. So I think it's going to be driven by financials, and somebody's got to get moved, and Cat's got the biggest contract. Like, you're obviously not trading Ant. Rudy is actually up for an extension, and my guess is they extend him at a lower average annual salary. Jaden McDaniels has a big contract, but it's nowhere near as big as Cat's. Naz has a big contract. It's nowhere near as big as Cat's. You could trade McDaniels and Naz, and now you've got to fill 2 rotation roles, and you're still not moving as much money as you would by trading Karl-Anthony Towns. So at one point, people thought he'd be traded last offseason or this offseason. I mean, I remember Howard Beck coming on Locked On Wolves a little over a year ago and saying, like, not to call anybody out, but everybody said this. And he said, like, hey, they're going to trade, I think he said shocked was the word he used. He said something like that, like they're going to trade him in the next year. And it all just kind of depended on how last year went. And now they're going to kick the can another year. So there's certainly a possibility because, like, sitting here right now, I would say they don't trade him until next summer. And I think it's more likely than not they do trade him next summer simply because of the cap stuff. It's not anything about like the fit not working. It's about the financials and can you find a stretch four that costs less, that can do some other stuff too, and maybe keep Naz Reid in that scenario and not pay the luxury tax. So yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere in the next, call it 10 months, but it's certainly possible down the road. And I think make or break wise, like it's huge that same thing with similar but different than Naz, and that everybody wants Cat to have a great year, right? If he has a great year, the Wolves have a great year, that's awesome. And he continues to improve his trade value. I think his playoffs, even uneven as they often have been for him, probably helped his trade value a little. Like we were seeing crazy stuff, reporters at ESPN during the season last year saying stuff about like, they couldn't get a first round pick for Cat and stuff like this, which there's no way that's true. And especially now, like he certainly has trade value and it's probably higher than Rudy Gobert's. So, it's in everyone's best interest for him to have a big year. And I think it's going to in part dictate, or at least dictate how much they get for Cat next summer. Well, sitting here right now, I think it's most likely that he's moved, about a year from now or around the draft next year.
He averaged 22 points. He hit over 2 threes a game at over 40%. He had 8 rebounds and 3 assists. And the defensive stats have disappeared from where he was as a rookie. Like he's not even getting a block a game, and that happens when you change position, and he just is not as good on that end. But when you look at what Towns did, and you can give me your thought on this, like, do you think did he have a bad season last year? Like, I think he was pretty good. Like, I'm not sure that he necessarily was the all-star that he ended up being, but I would say he had a pretty good to very good season.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he did make the all-star team. And Chris Finch, there were a couple times he got on a mini soapbox to the media last year talking about how much Karl-Anthony Towns has sacrificed. And he basically said, not basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he did say, like, how many multiple All-NBA, multiple All-Star guys would completely change their position, change their defensive role, fully accept a move from the number one unquestioned guy to the unquestioned number 2 guy in the offensive pecking order. Like, a lot of guys wouldn't do that, or at least they'd do it and they'd be noisy about it. And Cat did it, and he was better than he was the year prior in a small sample next to Rudy, and nearly as good as he was a couple of years ago, his last year full-time playing center. And certainly the numbers and obviously the fantasy numbers aren't as good with him not playing center, but he was an impactful player. His defense was solid. In fact, looking at the playoffs, he guarded Kevin Durant in that sweep over the Suns, and then he guarded Nikola Jokic in the 7-game win over the Nuggets in the second round. Like, it doesn't get much different than guarding Kevin Durant and then guarding Nikola Jokic, 2 of the best players of the generation. And he did it, and he was the best on the team at either role. He was better than Rudy at one-on-one guarding Jokic. He was better than any of the wing defenders at guarding Durant one-on-one. And he's just got this right mix of size and yet still enough lateral quickness. And at this point in his career, never thought I'd use this word when it comes to Cat, but savvy on defense. Like, he still makes a ton of dumb mistakes, offensive fouls, etc. But defensively, he's physical enough to get into the body of a Jokic. He's big enough to bother somebody like Durant. And he turned into almost a little bit of a Swiss Army knife, to borrow Chris Finch's term for slow-mo, this season defensively. Now, you still don't want him on an island on the perimeter. He's not a rim protector, but he kind of fit this like role of somebody who could guard, smaller or bigger threes and smaller fours and smaller centers, and like, and do some of the stuff and let Rudy roam and let Rudy kind of play free safety and block shots. And it worked out really well. And I would say overall, you could argue because of the team's success, like Cat put up numbers when this team was bad. He put up numbers that weren't as impressive, but still impactful numbers, as you mentioned. And he was better defensively, and the team was much better. So you can certainly argue this was Cat's best all-around season from an on-court impact perspective. And he's still in the prime of his career. So I think he has another really good year this year.
Yeah, I can't really see what would change even from a big jump or a big drop. It just seems like it's going to be pretty solid where he is. Now, in terms of looking at this team and what the major storyline is, I don't want this to be the major storyline. I don't want it to be any sort of storyline. But who owns the team? Like, is there any impact on that? Was there any resolution? Like, what is going on with the ownership of this team, and does that have any sort of trickle down on court impact?
I wouldn't say on court this year. There's an arbitration hearing scheduled for November. There's not a date. I think they said early November, with the decision coming 30 days prior. So by the end of the calendar year, by Christmas time, we should know what's going to happen. The cliff notes are, the old owner, Glenn Taylor, agreed to sell the team to the new owners, Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez. And they allegedly missed the last payment, whereas they say they had the funds. They were waiting for NBA approval. They own about 40% of the team. Glenn Taylor owns about 60% of the team. This next transaction would give them another 40%, bringing them to 80% as majority owners, of course. And the biggest wrinkle, and this is a real thing, is Tim Connelly, of course, the architect of this team and the architect of the Nuggets before turning it over to Calvin Booth the year before they won the title. He had an opt-out in his contract this year, 2 years in, and he agreed to kick it forward 12 months. So instead of opting out, there was a rumor, there was real discussion, like, would he opt out and re-sign this summer? Instead, he said, hey, let's move my opt-out to next summer, clearly tied to the ownership situation. Well, Glenn Taylor signed off on him coming on board, the old owner. It was Lowry and Rodriguez, the new group, even as minority owners, that led the charge to compensate him as handsomely as they did to lure him away from Denver. He wants to work for Lowry and Rodriguez. He doesn't want to work for Glenn Taylor. So if Glenn Taylor wins, there's a real chance Tim Connelly opts out next summer. And if that decision happens midseason, does that loom over the on-court product? Does it loom over Chris Finch and the coaching staff? Quite possibly. Or do they put their heads down and say, hey, look, this year's what matters right now, as they said all year last year? But if they win, then I don't think there's any impact at all, other than, kind of the weight is lifted, and Tim Connelly he may still opt out next summer to sign an even bigger deal, but there'd be no reason to think he's going to leave. That's the biggest impact is what happens with Tim Connelly. And for anybody that wants Tim Connelly to stay in Minnesota, really should be hoping for Lowry and Rodriguez to win this arbitration hearing. And we really don't know which direction this is going. It's like a 3-person panel. They each pick one person, and then they have to agree on the third person. And there's no indication at this point, like, what's more likely to happen. It's currently just a he said situation.
Yeah, it is one of those things that's, I think a lot of people may have even forgotten that this was going on, because it sort of bubbled up 4 or 5 months ago, and we haven't heard anything since. So it's sort of it's just sitting there like in limbo, but it's not like a limbo situation where we're just waiting. It's just like it just sort of disappeared, and it will come back at some point. A burning question for me for this team, Ben, there was obviously a number of them, but what happens if Mike Conley gets hurt? Because he's old. He was unbelievably good. They kept his minutes down. But like we've discussed many times, there's not many point guards on this team, and their backup point guard is a 6'1", 160-pound rookie. Yes, Nickeil Alexander-Walker can do it. Ant, I guess, would have to step into that role. But like I've talked about this with other hosts on other episodes, when we talk about best player versus who's the most irreplaceable player. Conley's got to sort of be put. Obviously, Ant, right? That's a different story. But like, if Conley goes down, like that's a big deal, because I don't know what they actually would do if it's like a 2-month injury and how they sustain that.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. You're on the mark. I don't know. I don't know what they'll do. Like, they'll have to start. My guess is Nickeil Alexander-Walker starts. This happened a couple of times last year. He missed the one playoff game in Denver last year, and they got beat by 15. It was when they were up. Or the series was tied, I guess. So it was kind of like that pivotal game 5 in Denver. Of course, they ended up winning 6-7 to win the series, but they lost by 15 points in the one playoff game he didn't play in. He's the calming, steady presence. He's one of the best 3-point shooters in the entire league, full stop, over the last 2 years. And it matters a lot when he's not on the floor, even though, he sprinkles in those games where he scores 4 points and doesn't do a whole lot, but it doesn't matter because he's on the floor and he's the straw that stirs the drink, and the team, functions well-oiled machine with him on the floor. I think it's like, if it's a period of time that's that long, I mean, I really don't know. Like, Daishen Nix is the only other guy on the roster that would be listed as a point guard, and he's a two-way player who's not been a very good NBA player, and It seems like they brought him back for bench vibes, and that's basically it. Like, he wasn't good when he played. He only played rotation minutes once. Even when they had multiple point guards out, there was like one game when they didn't have Conley, McLaughlin, or Monte Morris, and they were like, all right, you can play in Utah for 8 minutes or whatever. So I really don't know why they brought it back. So yeah, I think it's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I think it's Anthony Edwards running the bench unit. I think it's, or I guess running the starting unit too. And Dillingham, like, that's kind of it. Joe Ingles running some offense off the bench for the team, but that's going to be limited based on his age. So if it's something that happens early in the season, they're obviously going to have to try and trade for somebody or find somebody that's still out there, a veteran point guard type. but that would be the nightmare scenario, is if Mike Conley breaks down early. And I guess, as we talked about, Rob Dillingham is the answer. They said, look, we can't replicate a starting point guard anywhere else. Our best chance is to draft somebody and hope he's really, really good and develop him. And hopefully Conley stays healthy. So it's Dillingham. Like it's gotta be him. And from a veteran standpoint, it's Dike Alexander-Walker. It's Joe Ingles. It's, I guess, Dacian Nix as your last resort. And then maybe the buyout market in the spring, I guess. I mean, they went and traded for Monte Morris at the deadline, and that obviously didn't work out great. But I'm sure that the idea would be, look, at the deadline, we can figure this thing out. But if Conley were to get hurt early in the season for any length of time, you got to get to the deadline and be in a position where that matters. And without Conley, it would certainly be challenging, I think is a good word to describe it.
They should bring in my man who played on the Wolves Summer League team, Nadir Ifi, who I thought was
yes.
I thought he was good. I really like him as a player. And then when I turned up to watch that game, I went, who's little Dacian Nix in here? And I thought he was awesome. But that's beside the point. I was really impressed with him. But bold prediction time, Ben. You have given us this bold prediction. Now there is, again, I don't like doing this. Your bold prediction is that Anthony Edwards is going to be top 2 in MVP, but I do think there is. Everyone loves Anthony Edwards. Like there's always positivity, but there has been, I think, a rush at times to anoint him as something he is not. Right? Mm-hmm. He is. You heard it in the playoffs. He's the best player in the NBA. Yeah. Calm down. Right? He's the face of the league. Also settle down. Like he's very good. We push into this. He's improving, but he's still not there. And then basically since that really had a crescendo in the playoffs, then he had like a string of like 3 or 4 really bad games in a row, which was the struggle.
Yep.
Now, and this even happens in the fantasy basketball world where people are like, well, he's a top 10 player. I go, yeah, okay, he's never been a top 30 fantasy guy, so let's also calm down a little bit on this. What does he do to go to, like you said, finishes top 2? It is totally plausible that he actually elevates to become a legitimate top 5 player, not the top 2 player that people already think he has been, because he has not. He can do this. What does he need to do to get there?
I think there's 2 things. One, if he goes from a league average 3-point shooter to a plus 3-point shooter, mm-hmm. then he shoots 7 a game. So like that's an extra, 1.5 makes a game or something like that. So now you're talking 30 points a game because he averaged 26 this year. So you're talking 30 points a game if he makes 1 to 2 more threes per game, which I think is feasible. Like he's been around 36% each of the last 3 years. He was 37% 2 years ago. So if he becomes a 38, 39% is I think reasonable. We've seen guys make these type of jumps. Like we've seen guys like SGA improve their 3-point shot, like it can happen. If that happens, then the scoring totals, the volume looks that much greater. And so I think that would help a lot. And obviously if this team's in the conversation for the top seed, as they were number 1 in the West for most of the year last year, that helps a lot too. Then the other thing would be defensive consistency. I think like on ball, he received all defensive team votes this year, and on the ball, he is already, I would say, certainly a top 10 wing defender in the league. I don't have any problem saying that. He could be top 5 if he really applied himself every night. So it's on ball against non-marquee matchups, and it's off the ball because there's too many clips that float around of Ant just getting beat off the dribble by insert random second string Sacramento Kings guard, on a Tuesday in November when nobody's watching, or him getting, cut back door. Happened in the playoffs several times in a big moment, actually, in the Mavs series. I think it was the elimination game where he just stopped paying attention to his guy back, like the old James Harden clip when he got beat back door. Like that sort of thing happens too often with Anthony Edwards. Obviously nitpicking a little bit, but that's the question. If you're going to be an MVP, those things have to happen less frequently. And there naturally is kind of this push and pull where a lot of people want to elevate you to maybe where you shouldn't be, but then people try and knock you back down. And those types of clips, like the MVP voting on some level is something of a popularity contest. And that's why he got some votes this year. He got a 2nd place vote for MVP this year because people are rushing to anoint him. But naturally, then you're going to have people that are like, sharing these clips of him getting beat off the dribble by a random player. So he's got to mitigate some of that. Like you can't be on 100% of the time. Like, Bron has earned the right to take plays off at this stage of his career as a 39-year-old. You can't do that when you're Anthony Edwards all the time. So some of that stuff, I think. And then if he just shores up the 3-point shooting, like he's right there. And he's like scoring wise, the efficiency is still very good. He got to the line a bunch more this year. The assist rate shot up this year. The progression is happening. It's just some of that consistency outside the arc. And then defensively, because the top level of what he can do defensively is all defensive caliber. It's just, can he do it every night when he's also carrying that load offensively?
Here's where I come in as the resident hater, Ben, because again, I think with these things need to be like he's awesome. And what I was really impressed with last season, free throw percentage went up like 8 percentage points. So that's huge, right? He needed to do that. He was a below average free throw shooter, and he did it. Assist rate jumped up hugely as well, and I think there is actually scope for that assist rate to improve even further. But you may know the answer to this, you might not. His effective field goal percentage the last 3 years. Any idea what it is? Or just each season? You won't off the top of your head, but
I would say it's probably about the same literally this year as it was the.
Yeah. 52.8, 52.8, 52.2. Right, that is, and for someone in the first 4 years of their career, it's usually, not always, it's usually like some sort of staggered improvement. His 3-point shooting, 35.7, 36.8, 35.8, like it's the same. He improved his usage, and improving your usage and keeping the same efficiency is actually a W in that case. But the actual true MVP guys up their usage and up their efficiency and up their assist rate and do it all at once. And he has taken the usage up, the assist has gone up, and the efficiency has stayed the same. The other thing that I think is not necessarily a worry, especially for people looking for fantasy, is that last season, usage went from 29 to 31. You could look at 31 and go, is there room to go higher? Yeah, maybe. I think maybe 33, maybe 34. Maybe he can become that guy. But in that improvement last season, his block rate dropped. His steal rate dropped. Like all those things, which he's still a very good defender, but in terms of generating those stats, those things did come down. So how do you balance maintaining those numbers, maintaining or improving efficiency, doing extra on offense? That's why the MVP is for the very, very top, the best player, because those things are impossible to do for the large portion. And you can still be awesome. You can still be a first-team All-NBA guy. You can be a second-team All-NBA guy and still don't hit that level. And that's the hardest step to take, isn't it? Is getting from unbelievably good to literally the peak. And we need to get there.
And that's exactly why, like, the rush to, like, anoint him is so, I mean, he's 22. And so the fact that, because I actually thought between year 2 and year 3 that he didn't improve enough. Like everybody was, because he had some of those moments in year 3. It was like the back half of year 2 and the back half of year 3 is when so much improvement happened. And then the start of the following year, he was just kind of the same and there wasn't another level up. And I was disappointed for a lot of the reasons you listed. What really encouraged me last year was the assist rate jumped up, as you said, by like 5 points, but the turnover rate actually dropped by a little. Part of that is because he was also just shooting the ball a lot more. The usage went up, but still to see the assist rate jump and the turnover go down.
It's huge.
And to me, it's mostly shot selection. It usually is, I guess, when your effective field goal percentage kind of stagnates, but he shot a bunch more long twos last year than he ever had before. And his 3-point rate actually dipped. Like he shot the least, his 3-point rate was the lowest of his career, which is surprised me when I saw that, because when I watch him, it feels like he's shooting a pull-up 3 constantly, but it's just because he shot the ball so much more. Where, you know, if you just look at 3-pointers per game, it's much more even. It's still down, but it's closer because he just shot a bunch of, you know, pump fake pull up from 18 feet. And Chris Finch doesn't like that. And while he's good at those shots relative to a lot of other guys in the league, and they look pretty, and everybody loves the Kobe, the MJ turnaround. Those are like break glass in case of emergency, end of shot clock, like, you know, whatever, heat check, but it shouldn't be a regular feature of his game. He should be shooting more threes, getting to the rim more often. You mentioned the free throw percentage improving. He's finally starting to get a whistle at the rim, and he's realized that, so he's being more aggressive. So I do think that's another thing. I don't think we're talking SGA levels of foul drawing, but he will get to the line more next year, and hopefully Chris Finch can get through to him on more threes, less long twos. And that should help that efficiency improve just a little bit. And if we continue to see the playmaking improve with the turnovers staying mostly flat, that I think can help that leap. But I mean, you hit the nail on the head, like the jump from all NBA to like MVP caliber, that there is a jump. That's why there's one MVP and there's 15 guys that make an all NBA team.
Exactly. It's just getting to that pointy end. And I think what you highlighted there about the mid-range shot is where, when you can look at it and go, well, it is a relatively easy, an easy path to get there, because last year, per 75 possessions, 6.6 attempts at the rim, 7.1 in mid-range, and 7.1 at 3. Mm-hmm. Like, just take, like, and previous year, 4.6 mid-range, 2.7 and 3.4. Take 2 of those mid-range shots, put one of them at the rim, one of them at 3, and then you are at 29, 30 point per game scorer. Your effective field goal is 54, 55%, and then you are there. it's just, does that happen? Like, that's the thing, because he just relied way more on the mid-range shot, and they're just the least efficient shot that you can take in the NBA, and that is why that, even though some of the other numbers improved, like his rim finishing improved significantly, didn't matter when you're not taking as many shots there and you're taking more of the inefficient ones. And that's, again, it's a fix. Whether it happens or not, that's what we've got to find out. Lastly, your record prediction for this season. I don't think that you would have guessed that they were going to be flirting with a number one seed last year, but they were. And now you're hitting us with a 55-win prediction for the Wolves. What's the upper limit on that, do you think? Like, is this a 58, 59 win upside potential, or is that, like, offensive concern probably always just going to push them back a little bit?
I think making a run at 58. I mean, they won 56 last year, and they had, Cat missed a month from early March to early April. Besides that, they were relatively healthy. So I worry a little bit about injury luck coming back the other direction, which is a weird, like, usually the Timberwolves have lived in the opposite end of that forever. But like, they had a fairly healthy season. It wasn't as healthy as the Kings 2 years ago, but generally speaking, like that would be my one concern for some regression. Returning 7 of 8 rotation players, and then that's cause for optimism. Ant improving, Cat still in his prime, Rudy looks fine, like for what he is at this point. So I don't think there's any reason to think that they would be worse outside of unexpected injury. And so I do think, there's a real possibility they push 60 wins. But the West is so hard that's the other thing. If they were in the East, I'd be like, 58, 59, that's reasonable. I think 55, I felt like that was optimistic when I said that. But then again, they won 56 last year. So I think 55 is a good number. I want to say the FanDuel line was 52.5, if I remember right. So I think they beat that. I think 55 is maybe a little on the optimistic end, but if they finish with less than 52 wins, it would be a disappointing season. I think 58 is probably like a realistic high end because of the Western Conference.
Lastly, Ben asking all of the hosts here, just a quiz question that's not really a quiz, not even a right or wrong answer here, but we are heading into the 24-25 season. So all I want to know from you is, when you think about the number 24 or the number 25, there are 19 players in Timberwolves history who have worn either 24 or 25. Who's the first name that comes to mind for you?
Tom Gugliotta was 24, right?
He was number 24. That is correct. So Tom Gugliotta, number 24. Who's the last person to wear number 24? Do you know? There's no way you're going to know this. Maybe you do.
Do you have the year in front of you?
Yeah, 2024.
Huh. Was it TJ Warren?
Oh my God, it was. It was TJ Warren. That is why you are the host of the Locked On Timberwolves podcast, because you know about the illustrious tenure of TJ Warren on this Wolves team. Ben, what is happening over at Locked On Wolves this week?
We are. We're actually kind of like still basking in the glow of the gold medal for Anthony Edwards. So doing a little bit of post-Olympics discussion, the future of the Olympics team, and Ant. We're looking ahead to the schedule. Timberwolves will have an opening night game this year, which is crazy that they'll be on primetime opening night, following the ring ceremony game. And then Christmas Day game, and also they have the best draw in the Western Conference for the in-season tournament, or the NBA Cup, I guess it's called this year. They have a very winnable group. It's like Portland and Houston and Sacramento, or the Clippers in Sacramento. Yeah. So crazy. Yeah. Anyway, so big schedule release upcoming. Excited to see what that draw is for the Wolves. But once the full schedule's out, we'll do some schedule predictions. I'll kind of hone in on a win prediction. We'll do all that stuff here over the next couple of weeks at Locked On Wolves.
So if you want to hear more about the Minnesota Timberwolves, go check out Ben over at Locked On Wolves. Thank you again for coming on and chatting about the Wolves.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh.
And that does bring us to the end of the Minnesota Timberwolves season preview show. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm being a hater about Ant or about Naz, but I do think it's important to fully grasp what the actual reality of the situation is versus getting carried away on vibes and aura, because that's a bad way of sort of approaching things from a real life basketball analysis, but also from a fantasy perspective. And just wanted to make sure that both sides of those things are always out there. And you know how I like to do that, because people will often just highlight the positives and then the negatives come and they're very, very quiet about it. And then that can often lead to a misunderstanding about what's actually going on in certain situations. So again, love Ant, love Naz Reid. honestly, I like most NBA players. It's about trying to provide the proper context around everything. Anyway, if you want to provide some context and tell me how much I hate Anthony Edwards and hate Naz Reid and hate everybody on this team, you drop that in the comments here on YouTube, and you can give it 2 thumbs down if you like, and then a thumb up just in case. And subscribe, do all that stuff, guys. We're done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.